I used to joke to people that my experience working in government was like trying to run a marathon with sandbags attached to my leg with everybody booing.
You're a mom of 3 young kids. You're living in San Francisco. Why did you take the job to commute across the country to go do this?
It was an honor. It was just the right president, the right opportunity, the right time. I saw Secret Service who was looking at me like, what's happening? I'm like, help. I might not ever be let into China again. The challenge of Twitter is that it's kind of a mirror to humanity. People do a lot of good and people also do a lot of bad. That's what's so interesting about venture, right? There's something new all the time. It's constantly refreshing. Oh my God, how cool would it be to even work at a company called Yahoo? That just sounded fun. I think that there's a little bit of a perception that the only way you can serve your country is joining the military. There's so many ways to serve.
Welcome back to the Invested Podcast. I am thrilled to have Katie Stanton with me. In fact, I was just telling Katie before we came on that tons of people said, you need to have Katie Stanton on the podcast. You need to have Katie Stanton on the podcast. And then, like by stroke of God, karma, whatever you call it, I'm in Los Angeles at a conference. And who's standing next to me in the kind of vestibule outside the conference? Katie. So welcome on, Katie.
I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much.
It's great to have you. So I'm going to ask you to do your own background, but I'm going to do a quick run of it, if it's okay. Katie is a former White House director, served in President Barack Obama's White House as Director of Citizen Participation and a special advisor in the Office of Innovation. Former Vice President of Global Media at Twitter, co-founder of #Angels and Moxxie Ventures, which we'll dig into a bunch coming up. And like me, began her career as a banker, although I wasn't at JP Morgan, but you were, served on the supervisory board of Vivendi and on the board of directors of Time Inc. What did I miss, Katie?
Also on the board of Yahoo, which I really love and I'm super proud of.
Right now with Jim Lanzone and Arya
Yeah.
Burkhoff and that whole crew.
Lanzone is the best. I mean, what a dream team. And it's so fun to have this front row seat to see this incredible, iconic brand. The first job I ever loved. So really excited to see it have this whole new chapter.
Well, we agree on that. I think I've known Jim almost 3 decades now. And actually the first guest ever on this podcast was Arya Burkhoff, who's also on the board of.
Ari is amazing.
Yeah, amazing. What else do you want to tell us about yourself before we dig in?
I'm a proud mom. I have 3 kids and 3 bonus kids. So I don't have as many kids under management as you. So I'm at 6, you're at 8. But but a lot of birds in the nest, and it keeps life really fun and entertaining and loving.
Wait, are they all still in the nest?
No, we have 2 graduates, 2 in college, 1 in high school, and 1 in middle school.
It's a busy life.
Busy life.
Busy life. As our kids have started moving out and getting married, I actually miss having them in the house, which I find
I miss having
fascinating.
my tidy ones in the house. The messy ones are, it's fun to visit them.
I probably shouldn't say this on the podcast, but when one of our children left the house, my wife told our future in-law child, please take her and their mess. It's now your problem. So,
I can relate.
yeah, what we always start with here is kind of what is the core personal value that drives you? What's your core personal value?
I think my core personal value is service. And I think life is just better serving others. It's the greatest sense of joy. And that can be in your profession, and it can be in your personal life. It's in your family life. In a way, as a parent, you're in service to your children. Um, and it's, building a better world than you were given. And for me, that brings a lot of joy in work, a lot of venture. We're in the services business. We are serving our founders, but we're also serving our LPs. And it's important for us to remember that every decision, and this job is so many decisions that you're making all day long. How do you spend your time? Who do you spend your time with? Who do you spend that capital with? Who do you spend that social capital with in order to build these deals and networks and go to market, all these different things. And so much of it is a services business and making things better for those that you care for.
Where did you get this value from that your life should be about service to others?
I think my grandparents, and part of that was that they beat us both. They had 16 children. They Irish Catholic family in Western Pennsylvania, and they had 16 children. And as busy as they were, and as little means as they were always giving to others. And I just saw that. and how, yeah, they didn't have much, but there was always room enough for everyone. Now, at night when you went to bed, you couldn't leave your bed to go to the bathroom or anything because someone else would steal your bed because there were never enough beds. But it was just always filled with so much joy and laughter and love. And so that was a big takeaway that I had from my grandparents.
My grandmother used to always say, she just passed away a couple of years ago, "God save me from a quiet house."
Yeah, quiet houses are boring.
They are, and so you grew up like a lot of grandkids going to your Irish Catholic grandparents' house?
I did, and the flip side, my dad's side was Jewish, and a much smaller family, and so I had, like, this view into both worlds, and both were beautiful in their own way. I got all the attention at my dad's house with a much smaller family, but I was just filled with so much activity and love on my mom's side, so, you kinda play the cards you're dealt in life, right? And you try to see the best in what is given to you and also see like what could be better and what are the things that you have at your disposal that you can make differently and hopefully better for those around you and you pay that forward.
Do you think that, uh, your grandparents' religious beliefs, the Irish Catholic religious belief, it obviously led to 16 kids, in some way, shape, or form. Do you think that was also kinda critical for the focus on service and what, you ultimately inherited from those values framework?
I think so. My grandmother went to mass every day since she was 8, which
Wow.
is crazy to me. And that even with all these children, she would find a way to go to mass. And it was very important to her to have this sort of structure and have this faith and also to serve that community that she would volunteer, do other things. I mean, like how she had time for this. Like I can barely get my laundry done. And so she like, faith was very important to both of them, but particularly to my grandmother and on my father's side, faith was very important to them in a very different way. But I think it was that in service to something bigger than themselves, that, life, is filled with all these to dos, getting your laundry done, getting your kids fed, getting your work accomplished. But there's got to be more. And there's more to life, and there's this bigger universe outside of what we do day to day. And so it's in service to that greater good and, not to get too woo woo, but in that beyond. And so I think that's really important. And I think that allows us to get grounded that when we have a tough day or when we have a great day, just know that, some of these things are in our control, some of these things aren't. And, playing the long game for that greater good and that greater destiny.
Is that I'm just putting it together now that, you went from the private sector into government. Was that kind of background and kind of values inheritance or, religious service to the greater good part of that decision?
A little bit. And so I originally grew up thinking I wanted to do something in service. And, I had dreams of, working at USAID or the Red Cross or Save the Children, all these different nonprofits. And I went to graduate school for international affairs and public affairs. And most of the students there had similar ambitions. And it was in New York City, at Columbia, at SEPA. And part of that was I spent some time working in Kenya, and I worked for a nonprofit. I worked on the Hill and did some work there for the Foreign Relations Committee. And I realized actually in service that I didn't have any skills. And especially in Kenya, we would go and visit some of the communities. And I was there thinking I was going to talk about an economic development project and an environmental studies assessment. And the farmers didn't care. They're like, my bananas aren't growing. How come? I have no idea. I'm from Peekskill, New York. And then we're like, well, the elephants are trampling on our fences. What do we do about it? No idea. And I realized I was just so ill equipped. I had no business being there. And it really, it put me on this new path to realize I need skills. I have this passion, but I have no skills to achieve this passion and to do the service that I want to do. So that's why I went into banking. And I realized that so much of these great ideas. Like I really needed to understand the financial markets. So nonprofits are largely dependent on donors, either from government grants, from high net worth families, whatever. But you needed to understand where that money came from and then how to manage those different projects. So this was my entry into banking. So I went into banking for 3 years and it was great skill building, but there was no service to it really. Like I just wasn't very fulfilled. So it was a little bit of a zigzag, which is life, right? Most of us zig and zag several times in our careers. And that was my very long answer. Sorry, but
No, no, it's
long
quite all right.
answer. So,
In fact, I'm struck by the fact that you thought that a job at JP Morgan could help you with elephants trampling over the fences and the crops. You know,
I playing the long game. I really thought like, okay, maybe if I do this for a couple of years, then I can go into nonprofit. But a funny thing happened while I was there in that I was working on this trading floor. It was pretty soulless and miserable, but I was learning a lot and I had worked with some great people. And as I'm on the training floor, I remember I had a couple of my Bloomberg terminals in front of me, and the internet was just starting to take off. It was in the late 90s. And I remember just I had this aha moment. I started to go on Yahoo and I thought, oh my God, how cool would it be to A, find stocks on something called on Yahoo? That sounds fun. And two, to even work at a company called Yahoo. That just sounded fun. And then I realized, like, oh, this is a moment. This is a moment in time. And you could just see the excitement. You could feel the excitement of the internet. And I found a friend of a friend of a friend who worked at Yahoo, pitched them on why they should hire someone like me from the financial services industry to help build Yahoo Finance. And they were like, okay, come on out. So that was my move out to California. And really I think that was the path that set me on the path where I am today, just loving new trends, loving technology, and loving how technology can provide a very important service to people.
I think Yahoo is the right parallel for the unripe bananas in Kenya at the time. But they ultimately, right, who was the person at Yahoo who ultimately kind of gave you the offer for Yahoo Finance?
His name is Mike Riley, who was an early product manager there, brilliant guy. And the team around us, Mike Bennett, Tim Brady, Jerry Yang, Tim Kugel, and these it was so exciting to go to Yahoo and to California, frankly, for many reasons. It was new, it was refreshing, it was so much of a meritocracy. I did find that, I grew up in upstate New York and I think you're originally from New York as well, right? And New York is magical and amazing, but it's relatively structured. It's like, well, where did you go to school? What family are you from? Like which church, which synagogue, do you go to? And you get kind of stuck in a bit of a box in DC as well. So, where do you work as a lens to are you Democrat or are you Republican? And then people box you in. I felt in California, people couldn't care less where I came from. They cared what I set out to do. And I just thought that that was so refreshing and interesting. And there was so much exuberance about what Yahoo could build at that time. Of course, there were so many roller coasters up and down, but it was a really special moment. Also, I might have also been very excited about having free bagels and free coffee. I thought, "Oh my god, can you believe it? They're giving us free bagels on Tuesdays."
Yeah, those were, it was the beginning of my career in tech and VC also, and I still remember like those early internet conferences in like '96 and '97, and Jerry was there and Philo was there and TK would turn up, and and Mark Andreessen, before anyone knew who it really was at the time. It was early, it was exciting, and Silicon Valley was a buzz. It feels like a little bit like it does right now with AI. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I want to come back to Yahoo and AI and the buzziness right now soon. But I want to go back to the kind of service pieces. So I actually pinged Dick Costolo. Um,
Oh, no. What did
yeah,
he
he's a
say?
former CEO. So he actually had a super interesting question. Um, there's all these people transitioning right now from the private sector to the public sector. In fact, a friend of mine who's one of the people who's gone into the new administration told me that getting high-end real estate in Washington has become super expensive. There isn't a lot of them. There are a lot of people with, private sector wealth coming to Washington. What is the best kind of advice you would give to people who are now transitioning into the public sector, or people thinking about transitioning to the public sector from the private sector, and particularly tech and Wall Street, where you were?
First, I think it's awesome. I think more people should serve their country. And I think that there's a little bit of a perception that the only way you can serve your country is joining the military. There's so many ways to serve, and it could be serving at local, state, or federal government, and we should make it easier for people to serve. So I applaud everyone who has left their very lucrative and comfortable jobs in private sector to take a very hard job in the public sector where you're not paid very well. Everything is hard. I used to joke to people that, my experience working in government was like trying to run a marathon with sandbags attached to my leg with everybody booing and everyone's mad. So it is hard. And so I respect that. And I appreciate people willing to do this. So my advice would be to be as transparent as possible. I actually wrote, I think it was on LinkedIn or Twitter, maybe both, a post about this, and tag David Sachs, who I've never met. And I think he's a smart guy. We disagree on probably a lot, but I'm really glad to see him, doing public service. And some of the best things that you can do is, if you are a leader, to be transparent about what is it that you are trying to achieve, how you're going to achieve it. Take the feedback along the way because you will get some things wrong. But I think as long as you are transparent and honest and accountable, you will be successful and have an easier time.
What was the hardest part about it, coming out of the private sector and going to Washington, other than kind of being in it, in the spotlight and questioned and booed?
For me personally, at the time, my kids were really young and I was commuting from San Francisco to DC, which was horrible. But I think on the professional side, I think it was, trying to do, the best job that you can within the constraints of the environment. So, for example, I thought it'd be so easy at the time. This is gonna sound like kindergarten, but at the time it was, and this is in 2009 after President Obama got elected. So I joined in January 2009. And we're like, okay, let's go fast. Let's get the White House really going on Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and every platform imaginable. Let's open up the government. We created data.gov and trying to get every data set available, all the AI or all the APIs available, ready for anybody to program on it. And a private company could have done this in maybe, like a couple hours a week too. But it took us a while because you have the Presidential Records Act. What do you do with every like and retweet and share? Like that's a presidential correspondence technically. You're like,
Wow.
well, we can't possibly we don't need to save all that stuff. But if you read the letter of the law, there's an argument that maybe you should. And so, just trying to be respectful to the law while also trying to maintain, the goals of the government. And I remember, President Obama, I think his first memorandum was on creating the most open and transparent government. And so trying to do that within the constraints of the law was really hard. So, trying to move, I left Google for the government. It was just, night and day in terms of how quickly you could move. But at the same time, it was, an honor of a lifetime to be able to serve and to have that front row seat to history.
I've got to ask a few questions. All right, you're a mom of three young kids. You're living in San Francisco. Your kids are in school in San Francisco. Why did you take the job to commute across the country to go do this?
It was an honor, that, oh my gosh, I could have this opportunity to serve this president who I had so much respect for. And I felt that I finally had some skills that I could deliver. Hopefully the president was not going to ask me about bananas and elephants, but, I figured we would be okay there. But, it was the right time in my career. This great opportunity to serve. And I also knew at the time it was short-lived that I didn't want a career in government. It was going to likely be a 2-year opportunity. I only needed a commute for a few months with my kids, and then we all moved to DC, and, so that was okay, but it was just the right president, the right opportunity, the right time. It was funny though, because in terms of transparency, I had Google stock and I'd worked at Google, for a number of years and I sold it all. And because that's what the administration told us to do, that they, especially if I were to work in technology, I couldn't own any technology stocks. I couldn't even put them in a blind trust. I just had to sell them. Probably the most economically stupid thing I've ever done, but I did it, and I kept thinking, "Okay, well, there'll be another time," and, I look at some of my friends who have stayed at Google or didn't sell their stock and, you know, they have a different life than I do, but it's okay, no regrets.
Oh, wow. Uh, how did you meet the president? Like, why did he offer you the job?
Yeah, I met him on, I had volunteered on the campaign, and, so I'd only met him a few times, and mind you, I was not a very I wasn't the most senior person, so I wasn't in there day to day, but I had met him, during the campaign, and during the transition, I knew a number of people who were helping on the transition. Some had worked in technology as well, and they had nominated me to work in, the administration, so I was very fortunate, to have known a lot of people closer to the president than me, and then had this, incredible opportunity. And I'll share too, this one story, and it's a very small story, but I think it's, these behind the scenes moments that really reveal people's true character, not what you see in front of the podium. And that was, I was staffing the president on his first interview with the team from All Africa, which is, obviously an African based media organization. And it was the first interview with an African American president. And there was a lot of excitement for this, but from All Africa side, but from the president side, I mean, this was like the smallest thing he had that day. He's working on, the economy and healthcare and a war with whomever and all these other things. But there was time in his calendar for, I think it was a 7-minute interview. So every single detail of the president's life is, carefully curated and debated and negotiated and so forth. And I was on the hook for staffing him for those 7 minutes. So I was prepared. All Africa was prepared. The president was prepared. I was in the West Wing as we're, getting the room ready, and maybe halfway through this interview, there's this big boom, and Secret Service runs in, everybody's in a quick panic, and one of the light bulbs had exploded. And there were only 3 people from All Africa, and they're in a panic, they're sweating profusely, time is money, and they're not gonna get any extra time, and I was just like, "Oh god, like, not on my watch. This is terrible." And, I asked the guy, "Do you have a backup?" And he's like, "Of course." And so, he's quickly trying to fix everything, and President Obama was cool as a cucumber, and he said, "Don't worry, take your time, it's fine." And just that grace to this reporter, knowing that this is probably the most important thing to happen in this reporter's career to date, um, I just thought that was so magnanimous and so important and just something that I've always remembered in terms of, the importance of true character and empathy and compassion, especially when you're in a position of power like that.
Now, I just want to take a second to note that when you described how you got to Yahoo, a friend of a friend of a friend, and you described how you got to Obama White House, I volunteered. I wasn't that senior, but I knew the person who was on the transition team, et cetera. I often point out to people that early in your career, the most important thing to do is network and meet as many people as possible. And even if it's the loose connections that ends up kind of getting you to where you need to be. Is that something you've experienced even more than I'm describing in your career?
100%. I think about this all the time now as a parent. I talk to my kids about this. It's sort of the importance of compounding, right? And it's compounding. Normally, we think of finance and compounding your net worth and investing, but it's in people too. And building that network, because that network does compound. Where you went to college matters. Where you went to grad school matters, where you pick those early jobs matters. And if you're fortunate enough to be at the right place at the right time, that wow, you could just hit the mother load. And so I felt very lucky that at Google, at Yahoo for sure, but Google was sort of like, you know, the lottery of network. And I was fortunate enough to be in this class with Alad Gill, Susan Wojcicki, Sundar Pichai, Marissa Mayer, Brett Taylor, all these incredibly smart, talented people who were, still early in their careers. And now I just feel so fortunate to know them. And so I do think network is important. It's something that is important to me to this day with, Moxie and doing venture. That network really matters.
How did you get to Google?
I got to Google. It's funny because when I was at Yahoo, I loved Yahoo. It was the best job I had ever had. And I thought, well, what could possibly be better than Yahoo? And I had just had twins, and so I had 3 kids under 2, which is not really recommended. That was a lot. And I was on maternity leave, and then I thought, "Well, this is really hard. Maybe I'll stay home a little longer." I stayed home a little longer and realized, "No, this is really hard. I need to go back to work. That's easier." And, um, and I thought about going back to Yahoo, but I could see Google's slope and how fast it was growing, and that was another, I think, just, like, hustle of, who do I know at Google? And it was a friend of a friend who was a recruiter who had helped me get my first interview, and I think I had 14 interviews. I was breastfeeding one or maybe both of my twins at the time in a closet, trying to do this interview and hoping to God that they couldn't hear that, like, sound of choo, 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 choo. I got this job, and it was awesome. Just there is another level of vibrancy at Google, the same kind of optimism, but another level of speed and focus that I was really excited to be at. So I was at Google for 6 years. The other fun fact didn't think about at the time, but now I realize all of my managers at Google were women, amazing women. So Susan Wojcicki, Marissa Meyer, Sekunder Singh, Joan Bradeye, Megan Smith. I might
Wow.
be forgetting one, but I think that's it. Five amazing women at Google who were all extraordinary in their own regard.
And Megan also ended up at the White House.
She did, and it was funny because at the time I got the job, I was working for Megan, and we were doing a few layoffs at Google, and I remember Eric Schmidt telling us that, "Do whatever you can to save your top talent, but we're gonna have to get rid of, people who aren't great and not performing, blah, blah, blah." And maybe a week later, I get the tap to join the White House, and I tell Megan, and I was like, "Should I take this job?" And she's like, "You should totally take this job." And then I realized, like, "Wait a second. Am I not top talent? Are you guys trying to get rid of me? Is this a plot twist or something?" And she's like, "No, no, no. You should really go." So it was great. And I remember too talking with Eric as I left, and he had given some really good advice. And he's been active in both administrations and talking to many political candidates. But he gave me good advice, which I think about even to this day, is that just get some quick hits. Like, get in there early. Like, it is gonna be really hard to get a home run, in the White House, but if you can just get to base a couple of times and just get, like, a couple of hits in there, like, that'll be successful and moving the agenda forward. And that's what we did.
I've got to ask you, you told the All Africa story, which was a crazy story for the people filming, but what's the craziest story about your time in the Obama White House that I need to know?
Maybe crazier was when, I staffed the president on his first town hall in China, and I was so excited and so honored that I got to do this, and just, again, having this front row seat to how things get done. We were in a hotel for maybe 2 to 3 weeks prior to the event where every detail from how he was gonna drive from the airport to which location would be host to this town hall, to the attendees. Every little detail was heavily negotiated. And I had to work with a local government, and we all had our opinions. And again, every little detail, and I lost on almost all negotiations with my Chinese counterparts because they were very powerful, they were the host, but we had a few tricks up of our sleeves, and so the major trick, and this again, this is so minor, but it's very important to me at the time, was that when the president enters the building, the presidential seal of the United States is placed on his or her podium, and so that was something we needed to do, but my counterparts didn't want that. They wanted, I think it was at the Shanghai Science and Technology Museum, they wanted that seal to be on the podium, and we had fought about this all week long, and they were like, "No, this is what we're gonna do." I was like, "Okay, I think it's a law and a regulation that this seal has to appear, and it can't not happen under my watch. I just can't let that happen." And so as the media, they were coming in and we're all getting ready for, and I knew the president was in the building. I had my earpiece. I'm like, "Renegade has entered the building." And very quickly I ran up and switched it. So the presidential seal of the United States of America could be there. And I remember seeing my counterpart, the other side, like, "No." And so he came running across and was like, had the other seal and trying to switch it. And in a flash, I saw Secret Service who was looking at me like, "What's happening?" I'm like, "Help." And they told the guy, like, "Sir, stand down, stand down." And so they came running out. The press is coming in, like, wondering what is happening. And it was too late. And I won. And so I might not ever be let into China again. I
I'm
think we're
glad to hear
good.
you were let out of China after that.
Um, lucky very good question because I was so nervous about it. He was so mad. I got to ride in the presidential motorcade and got straight on my flight.
Okay, Dick Castella asked me to ask you that question. I think that's a pretty good answer. That'll qualify even for improv, Dick.
I don't think he even knows this, so
All
that's,
right.
we appreciate
That
this,
seems
Nick.
Tell us about the transition to Twitter.
Yes. So, well, it was funny because not only here's my double whammy. Not only did I leave all my Google stock on the table, I had talked to Ev about joining Twitter in 2008, and which would have been very early. And then I was like, no, I am an economic genius and I'm going to sell all my Google stock and I'm not going to join Twitter in 2008. I'm going to go work for the federal government for $82,000 a year. And um, so I'd, gone again, no regrets. But after my 2 years of serving, which was amazing, I really miss California. My family miss California, and I miss working in tech. And I called Ev back and Dick, who had joined since, and said, "By any chance, do you have a role for me?" And they're like, "Yes. Would you like to help build Twitter around the world, Twitter International?" Like, oh my God, dream job. And
Just not
and
in
so
China.
just not a China. Um, so yeah, they were like, "Deal." And so we moved back to California, and I joined Twitter in August of 2010, which was amazing.
By the way, we should just tell listeners we don't have to take up a collection for Katie. She's gonna be okay. Even though she sold the Google stock and everything for $82,000 and missed Twitter in 2008, Katie will be okay. Don't worry. I wanna actually start in today's Twitter. So you were there in Twitter, I guess it's now 15 or so years ago. And I'd love to hear what you think about how Elon has taken Twitter. I imagine if you don't agree with Sachs, you probably don't agree with Elon much on politics either. Um, what do you think about the direction he's taken it in and what Elon's done with Twitter?
It's funny because I think directionally, a lot of us agree on things. Can Twitter be more efficient? Yes. Can the federal government be more efficient? Yes, of course. I think it's the how where we tend to disagree. I do think Twitter, where it's gotten better has been the use of AI. I think Grok is great. And I think all these different platforms are really helpful, really useful, really valuable. Where it is not been great is that at least my feed is very far right wing suddenly. Like these are a lot of voices that I feel like it's not there to inform me. It's there to sort of irritate me. And that's a bummer. And a lot of the people that maybe I had mutual follows with, maybe they've left. Well, not maybe, certainly they've left. Maybe they're on Threads or Blue Sky or other things, but I still feel very loyal to Twitter. I want to stay on Twitter. I love Twitter. I think it's a great platform. I think it's important to have a place where people can debate and disagree. Where it has fallen short, feel like there's more hate, there's more anger, there's more misinformation. Things like, we took trust and safety very seriously while I was at Twitter. Even pieces of, verifying the person is who they say they are. Whereas now there's no trust and safety team, or it's very, very small. And, the verification practice is basically like, if you got $10 a month or whatever it is a month, like you're verified. And that can cause misinformation because people think like, oh, this must be true. And that causes danger, that causes sadness, this causes all kinds of strife, and we have enough strife in the world. It would be great if we had more opportunities to bring people together that just have really thoughtful conversations.
Are you on Threads too?
I am, but I'm not active. I tried for a while, but to be honest, I felt like it was actually the opposite. It's all left wing, and or maybe that's left wing, and so and that doesn't help either. Like it can't be these silos getting angry together or angry at each other. So if you can let me know if there's a platform of reasonable people in the middle, and normalcy in the middle. I think that's the place to be.
Ironically, I was, I guess you could say joking with somebody a couple of weeks ago. Who would have imagined that church and synagogue has become the place where you can have people with differing opinions together? I mean, politics has become kind of this religious schism, much more so than religion has been become.
I agree, and I think and I think the key to that is that it's local. That, when you're local and you're in this community that you share, you realize, like, you're in this together, and it's easier to be mad at somebody far away that you don't know, or, like, when you're in a car and someone cuts you off and you can give them the finger or whatever, like, because you might not see them again. But it's, these community groups and religious groups at the local level that I think have the opportunity to really heal us.
Yeah, I think sports too, for what it's worth. I was just
Sports
actually with
too,
the
yes.
with the senior politician who I think made a super interesting observation. He said that um, musicians and actors, which are kind of forms of people who have big platforms, tend to become international or national, whereas sports tends to be regional and local. And so sports brings people together more, whereas actors and musicians can become more divisive. And maybe not an accident, by the way, that you see so many sports figures who are religious, baseball players going around after they hit a home run and looking up on high and basketball players praying before the game. I think it's interesting. Sports and church and synagogue feels like a good place to get out of the schism.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's right.
So, I need to ask you because you came out of the Obama White House and you just said what you said about what's now X and used to be Twitter. Um, and when I was talking with a bunch of people about this podcast, so at least two of them, including Chamath Palapathy, said I should ask you the question also. But candidly, it was in my head before. Like, what's your thinking like about the what was called the Twitter files at the time? You called it trust and safety. Other people would call it suppression of free speech or information or kind of the right information, for example, about vaccines and other things. Yeah, what are your thoughts about that period?
So I never even read the Twitter files, so I have no idea what was actually in them. But I can speak firsthand that the people that led the trust and safety organization at Twitter had the utmost integrity that I'd ever seen. That they were very careful, very thoughtful about how do we protect our users, and how do we also honor the rules of the road and the laws that exist. And the challenge of Twitter is that it's kind of a mirror to humanity, that people do a lot of good and people also do a lot of bad. And a lot of that can just like go roam really fast and like a virus and infect a lot of people. And, the general counsel led the trust and safety team and, I think did a very good job of balancing and things that, we couldn't have predicted when Twitter was born. I'm sure Ev and Jack didn't think like, well, what should we do if somebody beheads somebody and lets that video go on this platform? Like, Ev's first thing was like, what kind of ice cream should I eat? Like it started with something very hopeful and very like positive and fun. And again, like there's bad in the world and that will seep through on these platforms. And so I really respect and admire and don't envy the work that that team had to do in response to when bad things happen and would try really quickly to get in advance of that and at least create some kind of structure and policy so the folks on the front line, when they would see things and the algorithm could flag things, that they knew what the right thing to do, were. And what I worry now is that, like, with all that burned down, you just, for a while, like, and I'm not on Twitter nearly as much as I used to be, but I'll see porn, I'll see like all kinds of stuff. I'm like, I never used to see that. And because there was just, there was better protections for a more positive customer experience. So it's disappointing to see it kind of fall apart. And again, I think I'm an optimist. I'm hopeful that there's going to be space for a more positive, safe platform for reasonable people to share their experiences and improve humanity.
I know less about Twitter or X's trust and safety. The place I've spent more time is TikToks. And there's been sure a significant amount of NCRI, the Network Contagion Research Institute. Remember a guy named Joel Finkelstein, I think. Um, on TikTok, and I've done my own research on it also. And I would argue that at TikTok, where a lot of trust and safety, for example, was in Ireland and other places, even if people kind of quote unquote did their jobs, they brought their own political biases to their work. Do you think that was true at X or Twitter at the time you were there?
There's probably some. I didn't observe it, but I do think, what the team did was at least try to remove as much biases as possible by putting in policy and saying, okay, when the following happens, here's our policy of how we respond. That gave very little room for someone to be like, well, I don't like that, so I'm gonna get rid of it. I don't think that there was room for those biases to really take place. Maybe some of those biases could inform some of these decisions, but, I know and I wasn't on that team. I was just kind of, aware of that team, and we would, have some meetings together for sure, but I know that team had the utmost of integrity and really carefully debated it, and when I was on the executive team towards the end of my time at Twitter, these issues would flare up, and they were heavily debated by everybody on that team, from Jack to Anthony and Adam, myself, and 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 it was always, I thought, a very intellectually honest experience of always trying to, protect our users and also, protect our shareholders, and building a business that we could be really proud of.
So you're on the board of like Time, advisor to Vivendi. You're at Twitter. You're at Yahoo. You have a fair amount of both call it new and old media experience. I think the question that comes out of what you just said right now is what's the job of a media company in the modern era. I'll open with a story. I was the opening act for I won't mention his name for a very 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 senior executive at a very well known media company in somebody's home. I guess it's right after Trump was elected the first time, um, and uh, a young woman who was up, by the way, a graduate student at Columbia, stands up and asks this very, very senior media executive, I understand you gave Trump more media time than you gave Hillary Clinton uh, by a long shot. Uh, why'd you do that? And the very senior media executive in this very closed room said, uh, hey, he sold a lot of ads, and we had a lot more viewers. It's what people wanted to see, for good or for bad, and I'm in business. And, you know, this young woman was incredibly disappointed, was, I think, horrified on some level. And I watched this dynamic play out in the room, and it's caused me to reflect over the last 8 or so years as what is the actual job of a media company today? Make money, be unfettered access to, the reflection of humanity, like you described it, or to provide a filter. And I'll broaden the argument a bit so that I can give you a broad space to go into. Like it feels like uh, ad-based models optimize for audience, and subscription-based models optimize for niche audience. Like the New York Times is after a very specific audience because it increases subscriptions, and so kind of inevitably, the model you choose almost reflects what you think your media company is supposed to be doing. But there's like 8 or 9 different of these models. And with that, I'm just going to let you riff on what you think a modern media company needs to be today, should be today, and where the pitfalls are going forward.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think, and actually, I should share too, Vivendi is so amazing. It was started by Napoleon. And so talk about history. It started as a water company. And, here's this, century plus old company now in, the media business. And it kind of ebbed and flowed, but, to these newer media companies today, TikTok and Insta and New York Times and, The Onion. So in a nutshell, these media companies are here to entertain us. They're here to maybe inform us, but really it is to gather our attention in some form or the other. And part of the reason why, if it bleeds, it leads, is that, it strikes and stirs something in front of us that we stay engaged. And even better if we click on something to get more, or even better if we're so enraged, we share it with somebody. And so it is in that attention business. And the more attention you have and the more engaging it again, the more likely you're going to click and engage and share, do these things that are going to make you as a media company make money. And so there is this incentive in a way to kind of hug the edges, which, hasn't been great. We live in the most divided world we ever have. And so I think it's a struggle that a lot of media companies have to be in that business. And subscriptions are hard, right? And especially if you have, people now in an economy that is a little bit shaky, like, if I could cut some corners, what should we cut? Like, we can get rid of maybe, the Washington Post for now, and we can get all this free content on the web. So there's, such a hustle for that attention, which is hard. And I think the most successful ones out there have been the ones that have built trust with their customers and have sort of, that trust and engagement, which has resulted in traffic, and which will then turn into money, and that's sustaining. But it's a weird time for media right now.
What is your go-to media?
I'm all over the place. I will, I still am on Twitter as more of a reader, and then I fact check it all between, I'll go to Fox, I'll go to New York Times, I'll go to the information mostly for, I kind of stay in my own lane a little bit in terms of venture. I respect Jessica Lesson. I think she's built a really important business and media company there.
Previous
Um,
podcast guest here.
oh, really? Oh, she's the
Yeah, she's the
best.
best. Yeah.
Yeah, she's so good. And Sam too. And they're
Also, previous podcast guest.
oh, really? Oh, wow, I'm in, like, great company. I'm so really honored now. And I look for those voices of people I trust, maybe a little bit less than the institutions. I'll hear what Chamath has to say. I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that, but sometimes he's right. But, like, like, why did he say that? Like, that's interesting. Let me double click on that. And this is why Grok is so good, why ChatGPT is so good, because you're like, well, someone just tweeted that. Is that correct? And then you'll get sort of this, I don't know, more informed and maybe more neutral answer, which I think is actually quite healthy.
So it sounds like you don't trust any media outlet anymore, but
I trust
probably
them
20 years
less.
ago you did.
Yeah, I trust them less. Like, I love the New York Times. I have been reading the New York Times since I was, in high school, and it was just part of our like family daily habit. But there's sometimes I'm like, I don't like that's a little bit, extreme. And I think this is like a common thing, right? I think, most Americans, and maybe this is a global thing, that there's a lot of mistrust for institutions, for media companies, for government, for, maybe religion, for like the institutions that we've grown up with and maybe assumed, too much of them. So I think maybe that's, the silver lining, that we've lost some trust, but it has made us work harder to seek truth and to fact check ourselves and not be so lazy and assume that what we heard is factual and come up with our own decisions and opinions on things.
Given where we are in the trends of technology, is trust and trust in the media and maybe coming together ever coming back, or are we just kind of destined for echo chambers and lack of trust going forward?
I'm not super optimistic here. Um, because the other thing I see trend wise happening is that, similar to if you're on Instagram or TikTok or even, X now, it is so hyper personalized to you. Right. And so it'll see like all the things like, I need to get White Lotus out of my my feed. The series is over. Stop showing me stuff. But I worry that news is in that direction too. That when I grew up, we had 3 channels of news stations, and then you have more and more. But now there are so many, not only news organizations, but also so many ways for that to slice and dice to every single individual. So everyone in your local community can hear different things about the same subject. That's going to make us all crazy. So I really, really worry about that sort of like that splintering, is really going to, tear us a bit more apart, as opposed to bring us together.
Will the United States be around as all 50 states in one piece in 50 years?
Who? Yes.
All right, let's move on after that uh, Mic
I mean,
drop
I'll
question.
take France. I don't know why we're talking to Greenland. Let's take France. So we're gonna take a country.
Oh, so you're saying
Let's
we'll
be a
get to
bit
51
diversification.
states, but at least
Yeah,
you get the good
51.
food.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure you wanna buy France and its budget, fiscal, and immigration problems, but maybe.
We'll send Elon there. He'll fix it. Yeah, I know he wants to go to Mars, but how about France?
Yeah, yeah. I may
Actually, you
take
should
Mar
strike that because now the French will not let me in the country. Now I'm
because you
down to
brought Elon upon them. Okay, so you were an operator all this time, and then you go to be an investor, and there's all this discussion, and we'll come to Moxie in a second. Ever since I've been in this business, and by the way, I should say I have 0 operating experience. I can't operate my way out of a paper bag. Um, but there's always discussion about, you need operators to be investors, and people like Peter Fenton who have ever been investors their whole life and certainly very successful. Where do you come out on that? Is the operating side of you? I think it was Dick, by the way, prompted me to ask you this question also. Um, is you operate? Of course, by the way, he was an operator and investor too, so it's not a loaded question at all from Mr. Costello. But is it important to be an operator in order to be an investor, or can you be like a incompetent operator like me?
I highly doubt you're incompetent. I think there are a lot of paths to being a great investor, right? Like you can grow up in the venture channel, you can grow up as maybe a banker, you can grow up as an operator. I am biased, and I do think that operating experience does lend itself really well to providing a really helpful founder experience because you know how to build, you know how to get to 0 to 1, you know how to get to 1 to 10, and hopefully to 100. And I have, at least firsthand seen many really strong operators lend their experiences and adding value. And I know it's kind of a meme on Twitter and X of like, let me know how I can be helpful, but it is true. So, for example, my business partner, Alex Redder, he has to me always been the smartest person in the room that never acted like it, that he could take really complex engineering projects and simplify them down. And we worked together at Google, where he was a computational advertising engineer, and then at Twitter, where he ended up leading all of engineering to being the president of Katie Hawk, the electric flying car company. And so those collective experiences, I think, lend himself really well to being a great sourcer of talent and a great supporter of talent. So, for example, as we're talking, to engineers and founders as they're building, I might, as a non-engineer, be like, "Oh, that sounds really interesting," and then Alex will be like, "Yeah, that can't work, and here's why," or "That could work, but here's what has to happen." And like, "Oh, that's really interesting." So we'll come at, problems differently, and I think that helps us make better decisions. And then, things like, there are very challenging problems, especially that happen at seed, and it's typically, hiring your first sets of engineers. And so having people like Alex that could be on that interview panel that can help you go through like, here's why this person could be great. It could be firing your first engineer, and talking the team through it and how you'll get over it. And we've collectively hired and fired lots of people in our careers, and but sometimes founders haven't done it at all. And other things that happen at seed that I think operators can really help with is, basically like, how do you get to product market fit? How do you build a great product? How do you figure out your go to market motion? How do you hire your first salesperson and transition from founder led sales to, your head of sales? Do you need an SDR? What is an SDR? How do you write your first blog post? How do you get your first announcement in TechCrunch or the New York Times? Uh-oh, there's regulation. What do you do? How do you respond to this? Things that I think a lot of operators may have seen throughout their careers can add that immediate value to founders. And as you know, so much of building companies, like you have to make so many decisions very, very quickly. It's not like you can you're not going to hire a consultant to figure that out for you. Like you have to decide these things on the spot. So if you have a cap table that comes with superpowers across the spectrum, I think you are much better set up for success.
Why did you start Moxie? Like, what was missing in the world in the investing ecosystem that you said, "Okay, Katie, next gig, I'm starting Moxie."
Well, a little bit of that. So I was fortunate enough at Twitter to become a scout. And I had no idea what a scout was, by the way. I was lucky enough that Bijan Sabat, has he been on your podcast?
No, he hasn't. Great guy. He
Okay,
should be.
he's the best. He was on the board of Twitter, super nice guy, and had asked me if I wanted to be a scout. And it's like, well, what's a scout? I said, well, many VCs have these scouts, and you invest in companies, and your name is on the cap table. And if it goes up, you get some of the proceeds, and if it goes down, don't worry about it. I'm like, sign me up, great deal. And and then the other thing that happened is that a number of other women at Twitter, who are all friends, we're all working in different departments at Twitter. We decided to we collected together to say, like, let's share deal flow and help each other succeed in venture. And we call ourselves hashtag angels. And so those two things combined gave me both the opportunity and the confidence, frankly, to be able to go out and start to invest more actively. And I ended up investing in roughly 40 companies and realized I love this. This is so interesting. How do I do this full time? And to be honest, my first thought was I should join a big firm because I still, I need to learn. It's a apprentice business. There's still so much to learn. And I started to talk to a couple of my friends in venture, including Bijan and Chris Saka. Has Chris been on your podcast?
No, another one you should
He'd
be.
be great.
Yeah.
So both of them gave me the same feedback, like, "Can I curse here? Or you could beep it out."
Go
But they
ahead.
both were like, "Where the fuck is your courage?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "You know how to do this, just go out and do it." And, and I thought about it for a while because I was like, "Well, this sounds so dumb," but I really had no idea where venture capital came from. I knew VCs had money, but I didn't know where they got it from. And so, it just took a little bit of work, obviously, but, and I realized, you know what? I do think I can do this, and where is my courage? Hence the word Moxxie. Added the double X for the female chromosome,
Mm.
and I also believe that operators like me could add value, and I wanted to lean into that, and so, fast forward to building Moxxie, I started it solo. I did a terrible job convincing anyone to join me for Fun One, but I talked to Alex actually, and he couldn't do it for Fun One because he was building these electric flying cars, and he was like, "Listen, I'm a computer scientist and a pilot. I have to do this. These are basically flying computers, but when it's over, I'll join you." And that's what he did. So he joined for fun too. And we really leaned into this operating background. So we hired two more investors. Both are former founders, both are engineers. One's a hardware engineer, one's a software engineer. They're both fantastic. And that brings us to where Moxie is today.
What's the hardest thing or the biggest blind spot because you've got 4 operators and no investors and nobody with experience in venture capital?
It is hard, but fortunately, one of the things, and you probably see this too, and you've been at this a lot longer than me, so I could use your advice. But I think that there are a lot of people who have been in this industry for a while that are so collaborative and helpful. So, for example, when I get stuck on, I've never seen this before, I've never seen this recap before, or I haven't seen, warrants before, some of these kooky things that happen in venture land, they're, both a set of LPs that we have, and we're very intentional about bringing on the best LPs. So, like, Michael Kim at Sandana is, one of my first calls when I see weird stuff, or Jacqueline Hester at Foundry. They're amazing. Also, other, more experienced VCs. So, Jeff Clavier at Encore, he has seen
Great guy.
everything. Great guy. He is a LP at Moxie too. So I'll send him notes, and Jeff being Jeff and very French, he'll just tell me, he's like, this is wrong. You shouldn't do it this way. Here's what you should do. Like, okay, thank you. I also want to give Jeff a shout out because when I started Moxie, and again, I had no idea where money came from, I was kind of surprised. Like, there are some people in the community that couldn't have been more helpful, some people that weren't, and are like, all right, whatever. And then some people who came out of the blue that were helpful. But Jeff Clave stands out because I remember he invited me over and he literally sat me down, opened up his spreadsheet of LPs, and was like, here are people that you should talk to. Let me do intros. Mark Suster from Upfront, same thing. I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so, like, menschy and so beautiful and so kind. I'm gonna do the same thing one day and pay that forward." So that kind of a community, both on the LP side and the co-investor side, providing a lot of mentorship and filling in those blind spots, and there are plenty of blind spots. That's what's so interesting about venture, right? There's something new all the time. It's constantly refreshing, and learning new things.
So you got this courage, you got this moxie. Okay, what was the scariest moment though? Or when you said, "Okay, maybe this is not for me?"
I think the scariest moment, was just like, am I gonna be good at it? Am I gonna, first, be good at fundraising? Can I raise this initial set of capital? And then the new fear of like, okay, am I gonna be good at getting the ownership that I'm setting out to do? Because it's very different getting 5 to 10% ownership than writing a 25K angel check. And
Have you
then
succeeded on the ownership? Have you stuck to
I
the 5 to
have.
10%?
Yes, so I've
Have you done
succeeded at
any deals
fundraising.
below?
I have, and this
Why?
is one of yeah, why? Because and this is a struggle where you're like, "Oh, I love this founder. I am gonna be sick to my stomach with FOMO if we're not in this deal. I just wanna be in the best deals, and I'm gonna make an exception, and here's why." So we've made a few of these exceptions. Time will tell if we got that right.
How many is a
Um,
few?
Less than 5 out of 55 or so over
Okay, not bad.
time.
Okay.
So one was recent. It's a woman that I worked with at a former company, and she's just one of those like high octane, high slope, blank check founder. Whatever she does, I want to be in. And it was such a competitive round, and she made room for us because of our relationship. And it's like I really I care, but I don't care because I just have such conviction in her, and it turns out she's building something really meaningful. I can't announce it here, but I will announce another time,
Come on, Katie.
for you.
You can
What's
announce it.
that?
You can announce it, it's okay.
Actually, I will share. Her name is Fatima Sabar, and she's building Blue Note, which is AI for life sciences. So it's helping, the scientific community leverage all these tools to be able to get their products and services out to market faster. So it's very early stage, but man, is she an incredible operator and founder and human being. So I'm rooting for you, Fatima.
Okay,
And maybe
well,
now she'll feel bad about not giving us the full ownership.
yeah, there's always time to kinda, load you up. It's interesting, I actually wanted to ask you about this 'cause you worked at Color also. It's another kinda moment in your career, Color Genomics, or Color Health, I can never remember what it's called. Um, and where you were
Both are right.
what? Both are right, okay, you're
Both
a
are right.
CMO.
It started as color genomics, and I think now it's technically color health.
Yeah, so I reached out to Elad, who was one of the greats also,
The
uh,
best.
and, he asked how your experience at Color, shaped your views on digital health and the role AI will play in it going forward, and I actually wanna expand that question with your permission once you mentioned Fatima. Um, there feels like there's an opportunity, especially the operators, and you've hired some kinda deep technical partners at Moxxie, at this intersection of AI and what I like to call the physical sciences, but biochemistry and physics, and how that intersects with the world of health is interesting, particularly from a regulatory perspective. I've had my own uh, follies, let's just call it, with the FDA and AI for health. How do you think about investing in this area, AI-ing it, and then thinking about the regulatory challenges?
Yeah. First, Elad is the GOAT. And Elad is another sort of blank check founder. Whatever Elad wants to build, just do it. I remember him telling me about Bitcoin, and I was like, that sounds kind of stupid. And should have done it right away, but it took me a while. So Elad is the GOAT, and I think will go down as, one of the best investors of all time. He just sees things first and early, and he's right, and he sees around the curves. So, um, I think there's so much opportunity in healthcare at large. It's a huge part of our economy. We all want to live longer and better, and current services are pretty terrible. And so much of it is moving from a real sick care model. So most of the time, you don't go to the doctor unless you're sick and need to be treated. And how do we move to a real like healthcare model that we are more preventative and we do things to protect ourselves in advance? And I think color was a step in that direction, which is let us understand our predisposition to cancer. Obviously, affects so many of us, and using our genetics as an information source of what is our predisposition to at least breast and ovarian cancer. And what I learned there is that the science is there. The appetite is challenging. I think consumers are still a little bit skittish about wanting to know some of these things and also a little bit concerned about or like who pays for these products. But I think Othman and Alot have done a great job about overcoming some of those challenges and actually not doing this direct to consumer, but working at the population health level and helping these healthcare systems leverage many, many tools informed by genomics, but also family health history, all sets of longitudinal data to help inform and help communities better prepare for their health and be more informed of their health and active about their healthcare. So now, as an investor, fast forward to today, I am obsessed with AI applications in healthcare. I think there are so many interesting ways for us to stay healthy. In fact, I have one Israeli based company, MD Algorithms, which is AI for dermatology. And it's a father son team. Oded is the CEO, and he is a computer scientist, and his father is a dermatologist, and they're building a really great business. We have another company called VistaPath, which is AI for pathology. How can you use AI to better review a lot of the samples and understand, get to better, faster, more accurate results in labs? And we have another company called Pharaoh's Health, which, and not to be, pumping our companies here, but I think they're good illustrations of, where AI and healthcare can be really interesting. So Pharaoh's Health is using AI to automate hospital safety information. Right now, what happens in healthcare systems is that this is a manual process. You have, nurses and clinician data abstractors who are going through and you're taking this data and making sure that the hospital is complying. Like this is a no-brainer thing for AI to take care of. So I'm really bullish on the opportunities. I think the direct-to-consumer model is challenging, but I think the model working directly with healthcare systems and payers to help automate and speed up and reduce the costs can help enable more of us to stay healthy.
Pairs has been a tough model, and it's also hard to know with the FDA whether it can get its head around these things. How do you think about those 2?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting time for, government understatement of the year. But Dr. Bhattacharya, who's coming in, I think, coming from Stanford, growing up in Silicon Valley, I think that there's a lot of opportunity and perhaps, for him to help, both in a transparent way, like, if we're gonna, loosen up some regulations that have been impeding growth and development, that may not be a bad thing, but I think as long as he does that in the most like transparent and open process, that could be good. I think, as we're reducing some of, the numbers of employees that we have in government, I don't totally buy in like in the process of it, but given that there are, I really worry about how we're going to provide a consistent and hopefully better service to Americans. And maybe these are tools that AI can help with. I don't know. Uh, so trying to stay positive there that there, maybe this is an opportunity that, that we can build and serve Americans better with some of these tools at a better cost, a fairer cost, and again, improve outcomes.
I once joked that the right algorithm for government efficiency is the number of bureaucrats squared. So the more bureaucrats you add, the less government efficiency you have, and it's exponential. Um, eh,
Can I actually I just wanna touch on that point, if that's okay. That
yeah,
I had, a very similar opinion before going into government, like, "Ugh, like, I'm coming from Google, like, we're efficient, we know how to get things done, and there's so much bloat and unnecessary stuff in government." And I went into government, and some of that was true. But the part that I didn't recognize, and this is something that I think when I, posted to David Sachs and others about this, that there are so many wonderful and in fact, the majority of civil servants who could have chosen a much more lucrative profession, and they chose to serve this country, and they're doing a great job. And we should celebrate that, and we should make their jobs easier. We should applaud them. We should not boo them. We should make their jobs easier. And, you know, I just wanna make sure more people recognize that and celebrate that and not kind of assume that, like, government's all wasteful and bureaucratic and terrible.
Yeah, no, we agree on that. There's great people who go in. I just think it's inevitable in large systems, and particularly ones it takes a long time to bring technology into that they get kinda gummed up. So, I feel like that
Agreed.
you're kind of impassioned, supportive Fatima and, describing, uh, very effectively 5 healthcare companies. She invested in Clubhouse too.
I did.
Yeah. What happened?
Oh, I don't know. It was sad. Um, this was a great bet on awesome founders. I think Paul and Rohan are amazing founders, serial entrepreneurs, had been in the audio space for a while. I think they caught lightning in a bottle, and it grew really fast, and it was such a pleasure to see. And what I loved about it is that it was real time, it was authentic, it was a whole new way to communicate. And timing was perfect because it was still COVID. We're all trapped in our houses, we're miserable, we're trying to connect. And I remember, these moments where it'd be like 2 in the morning and I was up and anxious and I'd go on Clubhouse and I would see this guy, Shane Mack, who's an entrepreneur in Nashville. And then Shane and I would start talking and a couple of other people going there. Shane Mack to this day is now a very dear friend of mine that we met on Clubhouse.
Oh, wow.
And so it had a lot of that magic and that serendipity. And you could hear, Oprah joined at one point, and you could hear the voices and the authenticity of all these people that you recognized and admired. And then I think we went back to work and we got busy, and Clubhouse wasn't able to maintain, I think, a lot of that excitement. So the company is still up and running, and I am hopeful that they're gonna, emerge out of this as a great case study of persistence and resilience and come out with a new platform, but, it's not exactly as it was in the beginning.
I learned that you work, and we're gonna slowly come to the end here, that you worked, early on in life on a kibbutz. Is that true?
I did. How did you know that?
Hey, we have a crack research team, Katie.
Wow, kibbutz gadot.
Kibbutz Gadot. And can I ask what year that was?
That was in the fall of 1990, and I
I was also
worked
in Israel then as a student.
You were?
I was.
Oh my god, where were you?
In a place called Yeshivat Har Etzion, just south of Jerusalem.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I loved it. I studied abroad in Jerusalem. I don't know if your research team knew that, but I was in Jerusalem as well. It was a program with Hebrew University, and then they had some professors from Bir Zeit, and we lived in the old city in Jerusalem. And then part of that program was we worked in a refugee camp in the West Bank in Ramallah, and then we spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time in the north of Israel at Gadot, and so I picked avocados and grapefruits and then worked on a toy factory
Oh,
in a toy
wow.
factory.
And what was the experience like, and what did you take from it?
I loved it. I loved it so much. I loved it sounds weird maybe, but, like, just the physical work. Like, you could see your accomplishments during the day. It was hard work. I love the community aspect of just and you're at camp, right? Like, you're doing work and then you're having meals together and, and for me personally, because it the going back maybe to the beginning where, one half of me came from this, huge Irish Catholic family, and the other half of me came from this very small Jewish family. And my father's father died when he was 12, and his grandparents, like, he's just lost his entire history. Like, I have no idea that side of his family. And I was always just I missed that. I wanted to understand that side of my family and the Jewish faith. And a lot of my friends growing up were Jewish and so went to everyone's bar mitzvahs and all that stuff, but and seders. But I don't know, I just wanted to feel it myself. So going to Israel was really important to me personally. And I think the kibbutz experience too just helped me just feel that community on that day-to-day basis, and really brought it to life.
I wanna touch something a little personal if I can. Another person whispered to me you got engaged a few days ago or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Wow, you were on it.
We're doing our best. We're doing our best, and I also understand your husband passed away, a few years ago, and, both of your parents have passed away as well. Is that correct?
That's right.
I sense you're a sensitive person in a positive sense. On the other side, you've probably and you kind of heard it when you were talking about color as well. That you've learned what I would guess is some lessons about the fragility of life. Um, and I'd love to hear if that has in any way changed your priorities, how you think about things, and messages you want to tell other people about this.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think if you're touched by death early and often, like, you just have a different perspective of things, and you see that fragility of life, and sitting with your loved ones at their deathbeds or being surprised by their death and that shock, and I've had multiple versions of that. You just realize, like, you don't take anything with you. Like, the accumulation of stuff is in service of what? And in those last days, we never know when those last days will be, what are we proud of? What have we done? What have we given? What have we built? What have we shared? Like, what have we grown? And, wanting to make sure that, when that day comes, hopefully it's very, very far, that I'll be filled with that gratitude and that comfort that, I did as much as I could and, I was loved by many and, I gave that love. I gave more than I got. And, um, and that's what really matters. And, leaving that legacy that is something that you can be proud of and not taking anything for granted. That's why, like, now I'm obsessive about my Oura ring, you know, and, going hiking every day and doing these things and being, proactive about, our, physical and mental and our spiritual health.
So I guess Mazel Tov is in order, and congratulations on the engagement. And I
Thank
guess
you.
that's what you referred to when you said 3 bonus kids before. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Uh, Amazing. I wanna ask you a hard question, you can feel free, not to answer it. You are incredibly, buoyant, I'd say optimistic, filled with life. And where do you think it is both about your upbringing, your sense of service, that has brought you to this attitude given what you've gone through?
It just goes back to maybe my grandparents and family and, just having so much with nothing. We never went on family vacations. We went to Erie, Pennsylvania, and I thought that was amazing. You know? And the only time we went shopping was in the Mill Creek Mall in Pennsylvania because they didn't have sales tax, and that's what my parents could afford. And I was so excited to go to, like, Lake Erie because there was so much water. And, I think it's just that gratitude and appreciation for not that much, but who you're with and just feeling all that love from, my greater family at that time. So I think, that's fortune, that's luck, and just trying to capture that lightning and magic wherever it may be and paying that forward. And now I feel so, lucky with my kids and, I'm heartbroken for the loss that they've had to suffer, losing their father was such a great dad and having to see that and like that's the worst part of parenting, that is not in the parenting book, and, um, but seeing their resilience and their, joie de vivre and, like, and how they don't take anything for granted, and they're gonna do this, whatever they do in service and honor of their father and his memory, like, I ache that that's what has, is gonna inform a lot, but I have gratitude that they've learned so much from him and will, use that lesson, carefully and purposefully.
Thank you, Katie. I can't think of a better place to end, our conversation than right there, and if you come back for another visit to Jerusalem, you don't have to stay in a hostel, you can come stay with us, in the old
Great.
city, and bring the kids for a
Love it.
Shabbat dinner. We'd love to host you here, and to anyone listening, you can learn more about Katie on X. She has a great, handle at Katies. Had I known Katie then, maybe I could have gotten a better handle than the one I have, right now. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Please rate us 5 stars in all the places: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Katie, I can't thank you enough. This was just an incredible conversation, meaningful one for me, too. So thank you so much.
I'm so honored. Thank you so much for having me.